This podcast is sponsored by St. Francis Regional Medical Center in Shakopee. St. Francis is committed to caring for our community. As navigating the COVID-19 pandemic becomes our new normal, St. Francis remains open for emergency, urgent, and elective care. Learn more about the hospital's enhanced safety measures at stfrancis-shakopee.com/safecare. Hi, and welcome to episode 11 of the Shakopee Chamber Podcast. My name is Angie Whitcomb, and I am proud to be the president and CEO of the Shakopee Chamber and Visitors Bureau, and proud to welcome you to our fun little podcast that we started in July as a way of keeping our members informed on everything that they need to know during this time when getting together is not encouraged. You can find us on Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Apple, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, or if you're lazy like me, just say, "Hey, Alexa, play the Shakopee Chamber Podcast," and you'll get the latest episode. I would be remiss if I didn't thank our sponsors, our good friends at St. Francis Regional Medical Center, for making this little show possible. I am very excited today to welcome our guest, Minnesota Deed Commissioner Steve Grove. Commissioner, welcome.
Hi, Angie. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for making time. I know things have been very busy for you. So I want to welcome you. I do have to start out, though, as I was doing my research for this show, looking at your background. You've got your master's from Harvard. You were a writer for the Boston Globe, for ABC News. You worked at the White House and the State Department. And now you run Minnesota's Department of Employment and Economic Development. How does one make that journey back to Minnesota?
Well, really, it was all centered in family. My wife and I were working at Google out in Silicon Valley, and we were fortunate enough to have twins almost 4 years ago.
Wow.
And as they started to get a little bit older and we started to think about what mattered in life, being closer to family was really appealing to us. So the chance to come back to Minnesota, where I was born and grew up in Northfield, real close to Shakopee, was enticing because my parents are here still and my siblings are. And so it was really a kind of a family decision first and foremost. But I think there's also just this growing sense that there's a lot happening in the middle of the country that people aren't paying attention to and that need to start paying attention to. And as you look at the economies of our coastal cities and the housing prices and the business starts, things are changing those economies. And I think you're seeing a lot more young family people like myself take a move to the center of the country and search for something slightly different. And, it's my job to say this now, but even before it was my job to say this, Minnesota is a great place to raise a family. It's a great place to come in and work, and there's opportunity all over the place. And so it was just an exciting chance to come home.
Yeah, well, we're glad you did. Yeah, and all of those impressive things that I listed in your bio, I forgot to mention that you were an exec at Google. Now, one more personal thing, because I know a little bit about this, but you and your wife brought some of your Silicon Valley experience here for kids. Tell us briefly a little bit about that, then we'll dive into all the COVID stuff. Yeah,
you bet. Well, this has just been a passion project of ours for going on 7 years now. Silicon North Stars is the name of the nonprofit, and we started it really as a way to connect where we were from. My wife's also from the Midwest, to where we then lived, which was Silicon Valley. And every year we brought around 16 young rising ninth graders out to Silicon Valley from Minnesota, gave them a tour of Google, Facebook, Uber, Lyft, put them through a startup boot camp. They got to create their own companies. Really a fun chance to invest in our future technology leaders. And all the folks that we brought out were primarily students of color, or students who were below the poverty line, but had a deep interest in tech. And so it was a chance to kind of show them what's possible out there.
Yeah.
Now, since we've come back, there's a lot possible right here in Minnesota. So we've shifted the focus of that camp to some of our Minnesota technology companies. And we just launched a scholarship program and announced the winners just a couple of days ago to get a couple of students a little extra money to take that next step in their journey after high school and pursue degrees in technology. So we're excited for that too.
Wow. What an experience you've given those kids. That's great.
It's fun.
I won't even let my daughter on Google because she's only 11 and you're taking kids out there to tour it. That's fantastic. All right. So let's dive right into this. I know you and I've been on your weekly calls since the pandemic hit our state back in March, and your office has been busy. So I'm going to dive into a few topics today that I think will provide answers for our members and our listeners as we kind of continue to navigate through this. But so your office has been tasked with supporting hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans who've been let go from their jobs or had their hours significantly reduced. I mean, my staff was impacted in the same way. Now that $600 plus up was a lifesaver, and then that went away. And now you've brought back with other agencies, obviously at the federal level, the 300 top off, if you will. And while that's helpful, it's still half. And, don't get me wrong, we're grateful for it as an employer. And, for my employees, we all want to make sure that they're taken care of. But how long do you see that benefit lasting? And what can employers and employees expect moving forward with this?
Yeah, it's a really important question. As challenging as this pandemic has been economically, and as large as those numbers of unemployed Minnesotans has grown, that $600 top-off payment was really this huge cushion that I think prevented our economy in a good way from feeling the full breadth and depth of the challenge that we face. And when it went away, it just created a huge area of need for Minnesotan unemployed workers, many of whom never expected to be unemployed this year when 2020 came. And so it was a major benefit, a hugely important benefit. We were one of the first states in the country to get it issued, and we issued over $4 billion in payments, just that $600 top off alone. So it was real money. Now with this lost wages assistance program that came through the president, it's a slightly different program. It's much more finite. It's a succinct amount of money. It's going through FEMA. It's a complicated program. It's very different from employment insurance, but it is an extra $300 per week for a select number of weeks. Our prediction is between 5 and 7 weeks. We, as of this Wednesday, will have paid out the full 5 weeks to Minnesotans. There's some time it will take for it to hit bank accounts, but all those payments will have been issued. Where it goes from there, we're not sure. No state is, because there's a finite amount of money, but we're hopeful more will come. Ultimately, what needs to happen is Congress needs to pass additional benefits. And no matter what the number, they need to pass something that's going to help our unemployed workers get by, because unemployment insurance only pays you about half of what you made otherwise at a maximum. And so we're hopeful with Congress being back in session this week that something will take place, but it's an election year, things are challenging, you just don't know. But on our part, we're going to get this money out as quickly as we can.
Yeah, well, your office has done a phenomenal job. And I echo your sentiments about wanting Congress to get back to work and get some things done. I stand with all of my chamber execs across the nation. There are bills with language in them right now that would include C6s in the payroll protection, and we're all holding our breath, hoping that gets signed. That will allow a lot of us to bring our staff back, which would be great. So now let's talk about the benefits you paid out, because since March, your office has paid out more than $7 billion, I believe, in UI benefits. And you've exhausted the trust fund. And now with this new program, it's essentially borrowing from the federal government. So now you've depleted, and now you're borrowing on behalf of the employees. Doesn't seem like a good long-term solution to what's turning out to be a long-term situation. So what happens when the interest starts to accumulate, and how are we going to pay that back?
Well, we've been here before, and most states have. Back in the 2009, 2010 recession, we borrowed money from the federal government as well. Most states did. We paid it back in about 3 or 4 years. This is at a scope and scale that is far greater than that. There's no question. And Minnesota is not in any way an outlier here. I think over 20, maybe 25 states at this point are also borrowing from the federal government. I think our amount so far is around, last I checked, about $325 million that we've borrowed. The federal government is going to forgive the interest through the end of this year. We'll see if they will do more next year. But there will be that principal to pay back. And that's going to be a challenging part of digging ourselves out of this hole. We're hopeful that things will evolve, and that the federal government will be able to do more to forgive these funds, because every state's in the same place that we are, paying out record amounts. But it's a moment that this program was, created to try to mitigate. And so we're going to do everything we can to get that money out there. Minnesotans won't experience any delay in payments based on shifting to federal funding. And our hope is to get the economy moving again, such that fewer people have to request those benefits every week. We have seen that trend line go down in recent weeks, which is good. But it's still over 325,000 Minnesotans every week who are requesting a check from our department, which is just a large multiplier over what we're used to in any scenario. So.
Yeah. So Commissioner, those numbers, you said you've seen the numbers requesting benefits go down. Can you identify the industry? Has that been because bars and restaurants have slowly been picking up over the summer months? Is that the population that is kind of rolling off the benefits for the time being?
Yeah, it's an overall kind of slow growth back. There was an initial jump in jobs and return to work as restrictions off of some of the hospitality businesses went away. At least some of the restrictions went away.
Yeah.
You saw some of that quick bounce back, but consumer confidence is still not where it needs to be for that industry to be thriving, regardless of whatever restrictions any state has on that industry. People aren't as willing to go out and patronize these businesses. And so we did see a little bit of a comeback in hospitality, but that growth kind of slowed last month. Just job growth overall went from 3.8% in June to 1.2% in July. So we are seeing a slowing growth. We hope that doesn't continue, that it picks back up. We are mindful that we're heading into colder weather, and that makes outdoor seating and patio environments a little bit more challenging for restaurants. So we're trying to take a realistic view that this fall could be more challenging than the summer.
Yeah. I mean, we're hardy as Minnesotans, but I'm not going to sit outside in January anywhere.
No, there's no point in that. And we engage with hospitality leaders every week on these topics, and they're hard conversations, but we've got to keep talking about solutions to this that can keep Minnesotans safe and give them the confidence that you can go out in safe places and enjoy a meal or, get together as long as you're careful.
Yeah. That leads right into my next question. Like, we couldn't have teed that up any better, but bars and restaurants and hotels have undoubtedly taken the hardest hit on this. And I hear weekly from our restaurants. In fact, I got an email over the weekend about the enhanced or the increased compliance checks and popping in. And they're tired, and they're a heavily regulated industry anyway. And so they're feeling a little bit like, why are we being picked on? How do I, as a chamber exec, support that in my members in that industry through that? And why are those compliance checks beefing up in what seems like only their space?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to put a couple of things into perspective. First of all, it is a very small number, really, of bars more than restaurants, but some restaurants too, primarily bars, that have been these kind of super spreader type events where a bunch of primarily young people flooded into these places without masks and close quarters, and there were bars that didn't take any heed of state guidelines, and you suddenly got COVID outbreaks. And we've been saying all along, and I think we've been in concert with the industry on this, that it's bad apples. It's not the whole bunch.
Yeah.
And when you saw states like Arizona and Texas and California turn their dials back and completely shut down bars and restaurants, my first priority as deed commissioner was to say, we can't do that. We have to find a way not to do that because it could just decimate the industry. And we know that so many of these businesses operate on small margins. They're honestly, many of them are barely getting by right now.
Yeah.
So as an alternative to doing that, we said, well, let's do what the industry has asked us to do, which is to focus on the bad apples and increase enforcement as a way to ensure that we're only targeting the businesses that where there are challenges. Now, there's enforcements across a whole bunch of agencies, but we know bars in particular have been more challenging, and they're desperate. So we understand why some of them might want to, go beyond the current capacity restrictions and what have you. But I think the message that we want to share is we're not saying by doing increased enforcement that we don't think it's safe to go out and enjoy these places. And the vast majority of these places are completely safe to go out and enjoy. And I try to make a point every week of going to one or two just to, in my own experience, understand them, but also just to demonstrate to those around me that they are safe. But I understand the concern that these establishments have that at a time when they're already down, they feel like they're getting kicked again. And that's not the intention, nor is it the message we're trying to convey. But the alternatives are much worse in a lot of sense. So it's a delicate thing to get right. My agency does not do enforcement, so this is not something that I myself am dictating or leading. No. But certainly it's a part of our broader discussions in these efforts, and something that we want to make sure we get right and that we're fair about it.
I think that's just it. And you touched on a couple of things. The longer this goes on, we're all getting COVID weary, right? Pandemic exhausted.
It's real.
What?
The fatigue is real.
Oh, legit. And I think the more tired people get, and you're right, say the heck with it. And I call it the anarchist curve. Everyone's like just breaking all the rules because they're just so tired of it. But that's going to cause more damage than good. Although you understand that sentiment, tough to support and encourage that. So
it is.
Yeah. You say you're getting out. We saw a tweet that you were at the 5-8 Club and it incited a whole topic in our office about Matt's versus the 5-8 Juicy Lucy. So you'll have to hit Matt's next and tweet about that.
I love Matt's. I'd actually never been to 5-8 until that trip, and they're both phenomenal. But I wanted to give a shout out to 5-8 because I've never been there before.
It's great.
They're both classic Minnesota burger joints.
Well, and you can't go wrong with the Juicy Lucy from anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
Now, your office is responsible for all the economic development in our state, and your website, Thriving in the North, tells a great story of why businesses should come here and what we have to offer, everything from our workforce and we've got so many Fortune 500 headquarters here. But if you watch any TV, you see our neighbor to the west actively recruiting for doing business in South Dakota and encouraging businesses to relocate there for their strong business climate and friendly tax climate. So talk to me about what our outlook is here in Minnesota post-pandemic, post-George Floyd, post-election. I mean, are you anticipating a mass, migration or even an increase in businesses moving out? Or is that all just good commercial conversation?
Well, no one can blame South Dakota for spending money to say that they're a better state for business. That is not something that we have had to do much in our state's history because we are a better state for business by every metric. There's no metric that South Dakota beats us on, even close to where Minnesota's at. But I don't want to be glib about it. I think it's a real issue here because businesses do have choices, and especially businesses for which maybe you're at the border of Minnesota and it's a quick little trip over there, and man, I could have less restrictions or maybe a better tax climate for a specific business sector. So it's a real thing to pay attention to, and our whole division is built upon having those in the trenches competitive conversations with businesses about what's available here versus what's available in other states. And Minnesota's calling card has always been our talent and our quality of life. We've got some of the best talent in the country, hardest working, most well-educated, talented workforce that you can imagine. We spend money on our workforce through our educational system, through our workforce development fund, through our Department of Deed. And the quality of life here, which, if you live here, you get it. But if you don't, you think, well, it's just cold there or something. But my gosh, speaking from someone who just moved from California to Minnesota myself a couple of years ago, quality of life here is extraordinary, whether it's, the commute, the schools, the parks, the lakes, the Minnesota story.
Oh, yeah. I love it.
But we can't rest on our laurels on that front. You got to be competitive. You got to be aggressive. And that's why, DEED exists. That's why our incentives exist. That's why we need more of them. I frankly think we need to do more marketing. I sort of joke about South Dakota, but you know what? They're spending money that is really well spent, if you ask me, to try to share some of these messages. And we just don't really do that as a state. We, of course, do it on the tourism front. But our budgets for marketing are not large at DEED. In fact, I think when I first got here, I asked, where's the marketing budget? And everybody kind of looked around. There really wasn't a marketing budget. And I think, the legislature, and I can't blame them for this, looks at spends like that. And it's like, well, do we really need to do that? Spending on marketing? We could put that into services or something else. But the reality is it's a competitive labor market out there and a competitive business environment. And if you're not willing to be more aggressive with your message, both here and abroad, then, it's challenging. It only takes a couple of business flips for the dynamic to start to shift. So there's no resting on our laurels here in Minnesota. We may have a great place to start from, but we've got to keep working at it. And that means business and government got to work together.
Could not agree more. That's great. Now, today your office sent out some information about Workforce Development Month, and you're highlighting some things, and you've tweaked your programming in that area to make sure that all of those needs for job seekers are continuing, and I dare say, even reading your blog post, improving during this time. Tell us what you guys are doing.
Well, it's funny you say that. I think it's interesting how sometimes crisis can lead to better service delivery, not just in government, but in all number of businesses or endeavors or organizations. So, we knew coming in that we wanted to kind of modernize our workforce development service delivery. But that's hard when you're sitting on top of a system that was built, 20, 30 years ago, that's heavily dependent on brick and mortar, and that has a whole host of, reasons not to change.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have a giant reason to change, which is that we can't have people walk into our workforce centers because of the risk of COVID, at least in the way that we used to. So we really have pivoted to a digital model. We do hold virtual job clubs every week, virtual career fairs where we bring dozens of employers together to meet hundreds of job seekers. It sometimes leads to hiring right on the spot. We do all kinds of job coaching and resume over the phone. We're really leaning into a more virtual focus. And we signed a partnership with Coursera to give free online classes for a full year to any Minnesotan who wants them. That was a big deal that we felt was important given the moment that we're in. And we need to do more things like that. It's not to say that in-person doesn't matter. Especially when you're looking for a job and you're in a vulnerable state, talking to somebody, seeing them in person, that matters. Like it's as psychological as it is, just the search itself.
Absolutely.
But there is a lot you can do through venues like you and I are using right now. And speaking from someone who came from technology, I'm just a believer that there's so much efficiency in that if you get it right and don't lose the human side to it. So we're going to keep moving on this. Of course, we do want to get more of our centers open and provide services directly, but you should expect a government that will innovate for you. You should expect a Department of Employment and Economic Development that's going to try new things to help you in a time of crisis. And so our team has really taken that on as their charge, and we'll continue to work on it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, you're right. We all should expect a government that will innovate. And it's, you talk about all of the things that make Minnesota competitive and at the top of the charts. That's certainly always been one of them. Yeah. The innovation side, not always with the government, but the state as a whole.
It is an innovative state, and we should be proud of that. And I think
absolutely,
even right there in Shakopee, there's so many examples of this with some of your accelerators and the business start efforts. And you've got a great senator in Eric Pratt who really believes in this and has made it a big focus of his time as chairman of the Jobs Committee, who I really enjoyed getting to know over the last year and a half. So Shakopee's in a good place on this. And I'm glad to hear that and know that, because it's not just the inner core of the metro that's going to be the place where innovation happens. It happens all over the state. And you guys have shown that with the kinds of businesses you've brought in, with the kind of talent you're growing. And so it's an impressive community that you're building. And thanks to your leadership and many others, it's going to continue to grow. We know that.
Thank you. We hope so. That's why we show up every day, to make sure it does. Now, since the pandemic hit, your office has done a really great job communicating with business leaders, chamber leaders across the state, keeping us informed with the weekly calls via the website, every executive order. How do we do your preparedness plans? Here's a template. I mean, phenomenal. I can't tell you how, I just had it up all the time on my screen when this first hit. But one of the best parts on your site, and probably one of the least visited parts of your site, is the businesses doing good and safety idea examples page. So we've got one more question after this, but I want to end this on a high note because we are all pandemic fatigued. Do you have a favorite example of business or two across the state that are doing some really good things amidst all this? Because I think the headlines are far too negative all the time.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? I mean, I think it's interesting on one level, businesses that are doing great things for their employees. I think of just because I visited a few weeks ago that Red Wing Shoes over in Red Wing has given every employee an extra 3 weeks of paid time off. And they devoted just yesterday on Labor Day a huge campaign to getting people to find jobs versus just go out and spend money on shoes. So I think it's a kind of employee and customer focus in a difficult time that is impressive. There are a whole host of companies, from Edina hockey manufacturers to outdoor clothing specialists in northern Minnesota, who've pivoted to create things like face shields and different types of PPE that are really, really unique and really, I think, are going to make money for these organizations, but also responded quickly at a time when PPE was desperately needed. So, we are lucky to have a business community in the state that has a strong civic backbone and that is willing to step up when crisis hits. And, the governor's thankful for that. I'm certainly thankful for it and impressed by it. And it's something that really is a defining feature of our state.
Yeah. And we're seeing it here in Shakopee too. We had one business who had a habit of taking their employees to lunch every month, or bringing lunch in once a month for kind of the whole company. And when this hit, they stopped that and they took the money they would use on that. They went and they bought local restaurant gift cards, and then they took them to the CAP agency to hand out in the food shelf.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Right? I mean, like, people are just so good. And even,
Yeah.
you talk about the bars and restaurants in downtown Shakopee, 3 of them banded together and ran specials when they were just doing curbside, and they were donating 10% of their proceeds every week from their sales combined to, they donated to the chamber one week when they realized we weren't getting payroll protection, but they've donated to the hairdressers who were unemployed and weren't, while we figured all of that out, and benefits, and to the waitresses. And I just think, okay, here's businesses that are operating probably in the red every day, and yet they're still taking 10% of that and giving back to those who are in a worse position.
Yeah,
So
that's a great example.
those stories are just, they've kept us positive throughout this. All right. So my last question for you is, this is going to continue. We're now coming into a cold season, and we're probably going to see some spikes. What are the top 3 things you would want the businesses of Minnesota to know as we continue to navigate these? And, should we face another spike and potential tightening or restrictions? What are the top 3 takeaways we can leave with the businesses?
Well, I guess one might be that masking works, and we gotta believe in it.
Yeah.
And get past the politics of that and just put on masks. The data shows that it just fundamentally changes the trajectory of the virus, and businesses play a big part in that. The second I would just say is that more businesses should take advantage of the shared work program that our unemployment insurance office offers. It allows you to reduce the hours of several workers and still get UI payments to top off some of that difference, rather than having to lay off a certain number of workers to get through things.
Yeah.
But lastly, I think I would just say that we need to work together to build our own confidence. Consumer confidence is so critical to commerce. We need to tell the stories like the ones you've just told of businesses that are doing good, of safe places to go out and shop and dine and eat and engage. It's going to be hard. We're at a challenging time, but we got to build up confidence in our economy too, that we can get this right if we do the smart things, keep our distance, wear masks, get out there and support your local businesses. It's never been a more important time to do that. And I think that's something that we all need to build into our messages and into our day-to-day lives. So
yeah, it really does boil down. I tell my daughter, she's 11, and we started middle school today. I said, Grace, and our last name starts with a W. I said, 3 W's: wear your mask, wash your hands, and watch your distance. If you do that, we're all going to be fine.
I like that.
Class on that too. Commissioner Grove, I really thank you for spending time with us today, and for carving out 30 minutes to talk to our listeners and our members. And thanks for all you do for our state. And I hope you and your team stay well.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. You too. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And I want to thank our sponsors at St. Francis Regional Medical Center for making this possible. This podcast is sponsored by St. Francis Regional Medical Center in Shakopee. Your safety is the top priority at St. Francis, and enhanced safety measures are in place while you're provided with quality care close to home. Learn more about the enhanced safety measures at stfrancis-shakopee.com/safecare.